John was a hardworking mechanic who had seen his fair share of tough days. One rainy afternoon, after a long shift, he was driving home when he noticed a woman stranded on the side of the road. Without a second thought, John pulled over to help her. Little did he know that this small act of kindness would change his life forever. Just 2 days later, a helicopter landed in front of his house. John was a simple man. He worked long hours at the local garage, fixing cars and helping customers with their vehicle problems. Life wasn't easy, but John had become used to it. He didn't expect much, just enough to pay the bills and keep his small house on the edge of town. But on that rainy evening, as he was driving home, things were about to change. The rain was coming down heavily, and the roads were slick and dangerous. As John carefully drove through the wet streets, he saw something up ahead, a car with its hazard lights flashing. There was a woman standing next to the car, looking helpless and holding her coat around herself to stay warm. John couldn't just drive past. He pulled over and walked over to her. "Do you need help?"
John asked.
The woman nodded and explained that her car wouldn't start. John quickly checked the car and realized it was just a dead battery. He offered to jumpstart her car using his truck. Despite the pouring rain, John worked quickly, hooking up the cables and getting the car started again. The woman, soaked from head to toe, was extremely grateful. She thanked John repeatedly and tried to offer him money for his help, but John just smiled and waved her off. "It's no trouble. I'm just happy I could help," he said. The woman, who introduced herself as Sarah, insisted on repaying him in some way, but John only asked her to pay it forward one day. With a warm smile, Sarah drove off into the rain, and John went back to his truck, wondering if he'd ever see her again. 2 days went by, and John went back to his regular routine at the garage. It was another busy day, fixing cars and dealing with customers. John had nearly forgotten about the woman in the rain when his phone suddenly rang. "John, you need to come home right now," his neighbor said, sounding panicked. "There's a helicopter in front of your house." John was confused and a little worried. He wiped his hands on a rag and rushed home, his mind racing with questions about what was happening. When John reached his street, he could hardly believe his eyes. Right in front of his modest house, there was a large, shiny helicopter. A group of people in suits stood around, waiting as if they'd been expecting him. John parked his truck and walked toward the group, unsure of what to expect. One of the men stepped forward and introduced himself. "Mr. Thompson, we're here on behalf of someone you helped 2 days ago in the rain," the man said with a slight smile. John was stunned. "You mean Sarah?" he asked, remembering the woman whose car he had fixed. The man nodded and handed John a letter. John opened the letter, his hands trembling. It simply read, "Thank you for your kindness. It meant more than you know. Please come with us." John stood there in shock, trying to understand what was happening. Why would Sarah send a helicopter? What did she want? After a moment of hesitation, John nodded, still confused but curious. He followed the man to the helicopter, unsure of where this was all leading. As they flew above the town, John looked out the window, trying to make sense of it all. The helicopter soon began to descend, and John saw a large mansion below, surrounded by lush gardens. It was a place John had never seen before, a grand estate that seemed like something from a dream. The helicopter landed, and John was led inside. Everything felt surreal. The mansion was massive, with marble floors and high ceilings. The man who had given John the letter guided him through the halls until they reached a large room with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the gardens. And there, standing by the window, was Sarah. John blinked in surprise. Sarah looked different from the woman he had met in the rain. She was dressed in elegant clothes and stood tall, composed. When she turned to face him, she smiled warmly, but there was a serious look in her eyes.
"John," she said.
"I've been waiting for you." John stepped forward, still processing everything. "Sarah, what is all this? Why the helicopter? Why am I here?" Sarah smiled softly, but her expression was serious. "You helped me when no one else did. You didn't hesitate, and you didn't ask for anything in return. That simple act meant more to me than you know. You see, I'm not just Sarah. I'm the owner of this estate, and I have more resources than most people realize. But that day in the rain, I was just a person in need, and you came to help." John listened carefully, still trying to understand. "You reminded me of something important that day," Sarah continued. "Kindness is a gift. It's something you can't buy. And that's why I wanted to do something for you. I want to show my gratitude in a way that could change your life, just as you changed mine." John was speechless. All he had done was fix her car, and now he was standing in a mansion, talking to a woman whose life seemed far more complicated than he had realized. "I don't understand," John said quietly. "Why me? Why all of this?" Sarah stepped closer to him, her expression sincere. "Because you didn't hesitate. You didn't expect anything in return. People like you deserve to be recognized. And now, I want to offer you something that could change your life." John's heart raced. "What do you mean?" Sarah walked over to a small table and picked up an envelope and a set of keys. She handed them to John. "These represent a fresh start," she said. "The envelope contains enough money for you to live comfortably for the rest of your life. And the keys are to a car parked outside. Much better than your old truck." John stood there, stunned. I don't know what to say," he whispered. Sarah wasn't finished. "There's more," she said. "I have a position available with me. I could use someone with your skills and your heart. It's a chance for you to leave behind your old life and step into something new." John was overwhelmed. He never imagined that helping a stranger in the rain would lead to all of this. But Sarah wasn't done yet. "It's not too much," she said. "It's exactly what you deserve. You're humble, hardworking, and kind. People like you often go unnoticed, but not this time." John stood there, unsure of what to do. The offer was incredible, but it was also overwhelming. "I need time to think," he said, finally. Sarah nodded understandingly. "Take all the time you need. The offer will be there when you're ready." John left the mansion with the envelope and keys, but his mind was still spinning. A few days later, as he sat on his porch, John finally opened the envelope. Inside was a check for a large amount, more money than he had ever seen in his life. There was also a note from Sarah. It read, "This is just the beginning. Your kindness changed my life, and I hope this helps change yours. The choice is yours. You can keep going as you always have, or you can take a step into something new." John sat back, feeling a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. The money could change everything for him. No more struggling to pay bills. But the offer to work for Sarah, that was something else entirely. It was a chance to start fresh. For days, John weighed the decision. Finally, he knew what he had to do. He called Sarah and accepted her offer. The helicopter returned a few days later, and this time, it wasn't just a symbol of gratitude. It was the beginning of a new chapter in John's life. John left behind the garage and the long hours, stepping into a new life with a sense of purpose. Working with Sarah, he found a new direction. The work was challenging, but it was also rewarding. And for the first time in years, John felt like his life was moving forward. Looking out over the mansion's gardens one evening, John reflected on how far he had come. His life had transformed in ways he never thought possible, all because he stopped to help a stranger in the rain. He realized that sometimes a small act of kindness can change everything. John's heart raced as he stood in front of the mansion, looking out at the vast gardens. He felt like he was dreaming, and yet everything around him was real. It had been a few months since that rainy day when he had helped Sarah, and now his life had changed in ways he never thought possible. The helicopter rides, the generous offer of a new life, and the meaningful work with Sarah. All of it seemed surreal, yet John had come to embrace it. He had left behind the small garage where he had spent countless hours fixing cars, working hard just to make ends meet. Now he was in a place where he felt valued, respected, and had a sense of purpose. But it wasn't just the financial security or the new career that had changed John. It was the realization that small acts of kindness could have profound, far-reaching impacts. Every day, as John worked alongside Sarah and her team, he saw firsthand the power of compassion and generosity. Sarah had not only transformed his life, but had also built a team that truly cared about one another. John often thought back to the rainy evening when he had offered help without hesitation, never expecting anything in return. That simple moment, born from kindness, had turned into something that would shape his future. But as time passed, John learned that kindness was not just about grand gestures or dramatic changes. It was in the small, everyday acts, holding a door open for someone, offering a smile when someone needed it most, or taking a moment to listen. These actions, though they may seem insignificant, rippled out and created a wave of positivity in ways John couldn't always see. One afternoon, while he was walking through the gardens with Sarah, John paused to take in the beauty around him. "I still can't believe how much my life has changed," John said, his voice filled with gratitude. Sarah smiled softly, looking out at the landscape. "I can't either, but it all started with you," she said, her tone gentle. "Your kindness planted the seed, and look where it's taken you. Sometimes, it's just about showing up when someone needs you." John nodded, thinking about how many people he'd helped over the years, just as he had helped Sarah. Now, he understood that kindness wasn't just a fleeting moment. It was a mindset, a way of living that could create a lasting impact. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the mansion, John realized how much he had grown. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was a man who had found his purpose and had embraced the power of kindness. He had learned that helping others wasn't just about fixing problems, it was about being there when someone needed it most and making a difference, no matter how small. With a deep breath, John looked out at the horizon. Life had changed in ways he could never have imagined. And as he continued on this new path, he knew one thing for certain. He would always carry the lesson he had learned that rainy afternoon. Kindness truly had the power to change everything. John's life had changed in ways he never could have imagined. The helicopter ride back to his small home had felt like a blur. The next few days passed by in a daze, and he found himself overwhelmed by the magnitude of the offer Sarah had given him. He had always lived a modest life, working hard at the local garage, fixing cars and trucks for customers who rarely paid him much more than the bare minimum. But now, here he was, holding a check that was large enough to change everything for him. The prospect of financial freedom was a dream come true. Yet there was a part of John that hesitated. He had worked so hard for so long, and this sudden shift in his life felt almost too good to be true. How could he leave behind the life he had known for so many years? He had spent countless hours in the garage, fixing engines and dealing with grumpy customers, and he had always done it with a sense of pride. The work was hard, but it was honest. Now, Sarah was offering him a way out, a new life, a new job, a chance to leave behind the long hours and constant struggle. John sat quietly in the passenger seat of the sleek helicopter, the sound of the blades cutting through the air almost drowned out by the thoughts racing through his mind. The scenery below him blurred as they passed over the small town he had always known. The homes, the streets, the garage where he had spent countless hours, it was all beginning to feel so distant. He glanced out the window, trying to make sense of it all. Just days ago, he had been fixing cars, living a simple life, never dreaming that a random act of kindness would lead him to this moment. As the helicopter continued its smooth flight, John couldn't shake the feeling of disbelief. How had he gone from a mechanic struggling to make ends meet to someone about to step into a world of wealth and opportunity? He had helped a woman in need, not expecting anything in return, and now he was on his way to meet her again, but this time in a setting that felt like something out of a dream. The estate, the helicopter, it was all too much to process. The descent began, and John could see the sprawling estate below him. The mansion, surrounded by lush gardens, stood tall against the landscape. It was nothing like he had ever seen before. The architecture was grand, with towering windows reflecting the soft light of the setting sun. The helicopter landed with a soft thud, and John's heart raced. The doors opened, and the suited men who had accompanied him led him out of the aircraft and toward the mansion. John's mind was still spinning. He was in shock, his body moving on autopilot. As he walked through the manicured lawns, he couldn't help but think about the simple life he had left behind. His hands, once calloused from years of hard work at the garage, now felt out of place in the refined atmosphere of the estate. The men in suits walked ahead of him, guiding him toward the grand entrance. He could hear the soft hum of voices inside, but everything seemed muffled, as if he were in a different world altogether. When they entered the mansion, John's senses were overwhelmed. The marble floors gleamed under the chandelier's soft light, and the high ceilings made the space feel vast, almost endless. The walls were adorned with elegant artwork, each piece a statement of wealth and taste. Everything was so polished, so perfect, and John felt like an intruder. How had he ended up here? One of the men, a tall figure with a calm demeanor, turned to John and gestured for him to follow. They walked down a long corridor, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the stillness. John's heart was pounding in his chest as they reached a large room at the end of the hall. The floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the sprawling gardens outside, and there, standing by the window, was Sarah. She looked different now, John realized. Gone was the woman drenched in rain with her coat clutched tightly around her. She was dressed elegantly, in a soft blue dress that complemented the serene atmosphere of the room. Her posture was confident, poised, and yet, there was something warm in her smile as she turned to face him. "John," she said softly, her voice carrying across the room. "I've been waiting for you." John felt a lump form in his throat. "Sarah, what is all of this? Why am I here?" His voice trembled slightly as the weight of the situation settled on him. Sarah's smile softened, and she stepped closer to him, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made John feel exposed. "You helped me when you didn't have to," she said quietly, "when no one else stopped. That day in the rain, I was just a woman stranded on the side of the road, in need of help. You didn't ask for anything in return. That simple act of kindness meant more to me than you could ever imagine." John stood there, his mind still struggling to catch up. He didn't know what to say. He had simply done what anyone would have done, helped someone in need. He had never expected anything from it, certainly not this. But Sarah wasn't finished. "You reminded me of something that day," she continued, her voice soft but steady. "That kindness is something you can't buy. No matter how much wealth you have, kindness is a gift. And that's why I want to do something for you, John. To show my gratitude in a way that could change your life, the way you changed mine." John's breath caught in his throat. He wasn't sure if he was ready to hear what she was about to say, but he couldn't look away. He had no idea where this was leading, but something inside him told him that this was more than just a thank you for jump-starting a car. "Why me?" John asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why go through all of this?" Sarah's expression softened, and she walked over to a small table in the corner of the room. She picked up a thick envelope and a set of keys. She turned back to John, her eyes full of meaning. "These represent a fresh start," she said, handing him the envelope and keys. "Inside this envelope is enough money for you to live comfortably for the rest of your life. The keys are to a car outside, far better than the truck you've been driving. But more than that, John, I want to offer you something else. A position with me. I could use someone with your skills, your heart. It's a chance for you to leave behind your old life and step into something new." John stood frozen, staring at the envelope in his hands. The weight of it seemed so heavy, and yet it felt so unreal. He had worked hard all his life, but this was more than he had ever imagined. The money, the car, it was all too much to comprehend. But the offer to work for Sarah? That was something else entirely. John looked up at Sarah, his mind racing. I don't know what to say," he stammered. "This is too much. I can't just accept all of this." Sarah's gaze softened, and she stepped closer to him. "It's not too much, John. You deserve it. You've worked hard your whole life, and you've always been kind. People like you often go unnoticed, but not this time. This time, your kindness is being rewarded." John felt a wave of emotions he hadn't expected. His whole life, he had been content with small things, a simple job, a quiet home, the satisfaction of a day's work. But now, with the world opening up to him in ways he had never imagined, he wasn't sure what to do. This wasn't the life he had planned for himself, and yet, part of him felt like it was exactly what he had been waiting for. I need time to think, he said quietly, still unsure of himself. This is all overwhelming. Sarah nodded understandingly. Take all the time you need, John. The offer will stand whenever you're ready. John left the mansion that day with the envelope and the keys, his mind spinning with questions. As he boarded the helicopter back to his home, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had changed forever. The ride felt like a blur, the familiar sights of his town passing by in a haze. When the helicopter finally landed, John stepped out into the quiet of his neighborhood, his small house standing in stark contrast to the grandeur of Sarah's estate. He walked inside, his hands still trembling as he set the envelope on the table. The keys to the car glinted in the dim light, a reminder of the life that awaited him. John sat on his couch, staring at the envelope. He had always been content with what he had, but now, everything was different. The idea of financial security, of no longer having to worry about bills and long hours at the garage, was tempting. And the offer to work for Sarah, to leave behind everything he knew for something new, was a chance he never thought he'd have. Days passed, and John couldn't stop thinking about Sarah's offer. He thought about his old life, about the struggles he had faced, and the simple act of kindness that had brought him here. The money, the job, was it all too good to be true? He had always prided himself on his hard work, on earning what he had, but this felt different. One evening, as he sat on his porch, John opened the envelope. Inside was a check, a sum so large it took his breath away. It was more money than he had ever seen in his life. The note from Sarah was simple, but its message hit him hard. John, this is just the beginning. Your kindness changed my life that day, and I hope this helps to change yours. But remember, the choice is yours. You can keep going as you always have, or you can take a step into something new. Either way, I'll always be grateful for what you did for me. John leaned back in his chair, staring at the check. The decision before him was overwhelming. He had always been content with his life, but now he had a chance for something more. Something better. The thought of taking that leap was both exciting and terrifying. After days of contemplation, John finally made up his mind. He called the number on the card Sarah had given him and accepted her offer. The helicopter came for him again, this time not just as a symbol of gratitude, but as the start of a new chapter in his life. As John stepped into that helicopter once again, he felt a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. The work ahead of him would be challenging, but for the first time, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be.